how to get off-field right, but we've never focused on getting on-field right. And a lot of my clubs are struggling to get their on-field right. And I suppose that's probably my expertise, albeit I'm an administrator. I suppose, and I'm going to talk to you about my local club, which David's our head coach. In terms of, I suppose, some key tips in terms of setting up your structure. Anyone, Jono's just some housekeeping here. If anyone can just put in the chat where you're from, and also just if you've got any questions during the session, we'll cover it as we go through. Basically, I always talk about there's a formula to running a club, and anyone who's sat in my webinars, you'll realise it's about your people, it's about your finances. Tonight is about this. Investing in your core business. And I'm a real advocate of investing in your core business, getting good coaching, investing in your playing program, and accordingly. And I just think it's some of my clubs don't have the financial model to pay the bills, but fortunately, hopefully anyone who sat in our series can realise if you get the right model to pay the bills, you can invest in your core business and the positives can flow on from there. So I just want to set the scene for those. We might actually do that quick, just a quick first webinar check, Jono, just to see who sat in these sessions previously, because that'll give us a flavour of what. Over to you, mate.
So yeah, just as we go tonight, there's quite a few polls that we're going to do, just so we get some feedback, and it's a bit interactive. It's not just us going on. So if you just want to answer this one, how many, just finding out how many webinars you've attended with us, and so welcome to everyone that's new if you're coming through. And does your that you know of, does your club have a strategic plan in place? So yeah, just
mate, that's enough data anyway. So we've got probably, let's kick that into gear. We've got about 25 to 30 that are first timers, which is great. And we've got a lot of people that have sat in on more than 2 webinars. Some have sat in 10, believe it or not. And then we've got, obviously, there's a lot of clubs who don't have, half the clubs got a plan, which is anyone who asks me about their club, what is this thing that's not quite right at clubs, is they don't have a plan. And that's what we're going to touch on a little bit tonight. But this is Caroline. David knows it well. Everyone knows it's it's a farming community in the middle of nowhere. I was reluctant to put this up, but David, that's that 2014 premiership you talked about, which shows they're hard to get, and it's not all about premierships, but there's a formula to running a club, and I've seen a lot of clubs have cosmetic success where they have a boom and bust, and they invest in winning a flag, and then they spend the next 5 years picking it up. But I want to show you, Caroline has no town, no population. And I'm going to show you, I suppose, where the club has come from. In 2005, look, my background is AFL administrator, but I played on my footy at Caroline. My father on his deathbed put it on me, to be honest. He's a life member of Caroline, and he said, look, we need to get back and healthy. But our club from in 2005 had 3 footy teams. All the teams finished last. 82 years we've been around, won 1 premiership, 82 years for 1 senior premiership, no junior premierships. Our average win-loss ratio is 28%. But since then, this is what's happened for a club with no town. So I think it's important to set the scene about what can be achieved in a farming community if you get the right fundamentals of running a club. So we now have 8 footy teams. We have been in 8 of the last 11 senior grand finals in 12 team competitions against populations of 3, 5, 7, 10,000 people. We have a population of 50 people, just to put in perspective. And we've been in this, our win-loss ratio across all our grades is 71%. That is no fluke, right? So a club with no town, and it's one of the good stories of community sport. I just want to set this scene here. If you look at the president column, I'm not expecting all presidents to be a 20-year president, but that just shows up until 2005, we were wooden spoon, 8th, 9th, 1 senior flag in 80 years. But since then, we've had 4 senior coaches in 16 years. In terms of we don't have a lot of politics at our club. We've got a really stable president. And we've played in 39 finals in all those times. And we've won 4 flags, but it's just a great history of a club that was on its knees, just about to close the doors, and how it can be turned around. Our current captain has played in how many? 38 of those 39. So he's had a pretty good run, but he came through our junior system and did it pretty tough for a few years. So tonight it is open to all clubs, amateur clubs, junior clubs, and metro and regional. There will be a slant to Victorian clubs, okay? Particularly with the salary cap knowledge we're going to go through tonight. But there's probably 80% of the content will be relatable to junior clubs and senior clubs, and it doesn't matter what level of football you're involved. I think we've got nearly 80 people dialed in at the moment and across more parts of Australia. This is, for those that don't know, most of you are registered obviously, but we've got a two-part series. We're going to go through what I think is a simple structure to move forward. We're going to talk about the post-COVID salary caps. We're going to talk about the importance of having a footy budget. We're going to give you a salary estimator tool. A lot of my clubs get into trouble with estimating their salary caps. We're going to talk about different payment models for certain staff inside footy departments, and also some tips about contract negotiations, and particularly with players and coaches. And it's never been more difficult, which David can attest to, because we've been signing up players. I think we've signed up all bar 2 of our players so far for next year, which has settled things down. Basically, anyone who sits in my sessions, I always talk about the importance of structure. And, this is the whole club, but we're just going to focus on football. I don't want to overcomplicate this, but a lot of my clubs don't have a list manager. They don't have a football director. It's your core business is football. You've got to get that healthy. And that's been my role at Coralline, and I support David. And I'd like to think David's allowed to coach. A lot of my coaches around the country have to do everything. Some of them have to raise money. Some of them have to raise money just to pay the bills. Whereas, unfortunately, David's in a situation that he gets good support. We support him with assistance. But a lot of my clubs do not spend enough time getting their structure right in terms of whether your team, whether it's your line coaches, etc. But I'm a massive believer you invest in your core business. Your core business is your football program. And some of my clubs I deal with, particularly when there's player payments involved, they think that player payments are 2 dirty words put together. Have a guess what? They're not. I just think that if you invest wisely, and we'll talk about the value of a player tonight, because some clubs do pay overs and some clubs do pay unders, and we'll talk about how that all comes to play. We're going to talk about the importance of budgeting. A lot of my clubs don't have a budget, right? Let alone a footy budget. Actually, some clubs have one budget line. You know what the budget line is? How do we raise enough money to pay the players? That's all they think about. They've got no idea about the revenue side of things. This is just an example with salary caps changing, and this is pretty much our competition that I'm in. But there's some real gaps here. Insurances. The AFL provides baseline insurance, which I'm going to touch on next week's webinar. I encourage clubs to go to the high level of insurance that everyone gets the bronze default Jardine Marsh insurance across the country. For the sake of $600 or $700 a team, your insurance coverage can be significantly higher, and particularly non-football related income, loss of income. So a lot of I know we've got a couple of players that we pay for their loss of income, but it comes out of their player payments. But I just think at the very least, every club should have a basic budget. A lot of clubs don't have that budget, and they end up in trouble. I'm a believer that the board signs off on your footy budget. The committee don't need to know who gets paid what, as long as you work inside that budget. So the coach, the footy director, the treasurer, and the president, that's all, as I believe, is all that needs to know who gets paid what. And I've just seen too many loose lips sink ships in terms of, he came off today, he didn't get a kick, he's on $400 a game, and all the rubbish starts. All right, you don't need that. And I encourage everyone, you don't need a budget any more complicated than that at grassroots level. So this is an example where salary caps, people ask me, all right, the caps have gone down. How do we sign up the coaches? Well, our motto, and it should be proportionate to the salary cap. David's a good example. We've had a handshake agreement for 6 years, but it's if the cap comes down for us, it's only coming down 18%. So our coaches will come down 18%. And I think our physios and our trainers should come down 18% as well. You'll be interested in, and you'll hear with the trainers particularly, a lot of my clubs pay their trainers weekly. I think you should have an annual payment for your for your physios, because if you play finals, a lot of my clubs can get caught out with that. So I think having a basic budget is really important. Now, we're going to talk about an Excel spreadsheet, which I'm going to show you in a second. I've touched on the first point, confidentiality of player payments, who should know. And obviously, I've limited that to 3 or 4 people. There's a real challenge right now with the reduction in salary caps in changing the mindset of the expectation of the players and the coaches, because they're used to getting a certain amount of payment year in, year out. That is a real adjustment for a lot of our players. So we're sitting down our players and showing them proportion change, and if you spend the time to adjust that thinking, but there's still a small percentage of players who think they can, they can get their $700-800 per game in some community levels. It's not going to be the way. So I'm going to show you, I suppose, how we do our player payments, and hopefully I can bring up the right one here. That's come up. So we can share these, but this is just a simple model, and David would have seen this, where I've just made up a default model that every club can use. So our fixed fees are a set fee. Senior coach, the assistant coaches, and the reserves coaches. So we know we've got about a 20 grand cost to our coaches. A fixed cost, regardless of whether we win or lose or draw. I like to break our players up into 3 tiers. So who are our top 10 players? You'll notice here, this says a lump sum payment, e.g. sign-ons. I'm a big anti-sign-on person. I don't believe in sign-ons, that some clubs do. So our top 10 players, and we budget for those players to play around 15 games, about 83%. So, and that you can tweak that percentage, but I've been doing this for a long time for Coralina and never been out really, maybe once, which was last year actually, because we had a young list and we didn't have a lot of injuries. But we budget for everyone to play around 15 games. So whether they miss from injury or suspension or getting dropped, or someone gets dropped and sooks it up and takes off, it all happens around. We all lose a couple along the way. And we contract our top 10 players on around 15. Now, our next 10 players, they're on lower tier money, say $200 a week. Actually, I might just go up here for a sec to set the freeze frame, which might even help. Just bear with me. Freeze frame, I can't, there it is. That might help. Yeah, that'll be better. So if we go down, I'll keep the headings here. So with our second tier players, the top 10 are probably more guaranteed to walk into the seniors, right? And if they're injured, they'll probably, if they do come back, they'll walk straight back in. The players that are tier 2, they're probably going to average not quite 15 games, right? They're probably going to be, they're more your second tier players, and any player after 15 are probably going to be depth players, right? But we then have the next tier. So this is exactly what I did at AFL level when I was doing the salary cap for Hawthorn, Collingwood, and St Kilda. So if we got 22 players times 18 games, the number of match payments need to add up to 396, right? So we've estimated that a percentage of tier 1, percentage of tier 2, we're going to pay 396 match payments this year. Does that make sense? And again, we don't pay players for finals. Everyone, if you've got a contract, make sure they play for the jumper in the final. So our salary cap this year is 90 grand. Our coach is going to be 20. So we're going to probably spend about 110 on our coaches and our players. And it's about 6 grand a week. It's a lot of dough, isn't it? So it just puts it in perspective. We'll share that template with clubs, but a lot of my clubs don't have anything like that. If you're not comfortable having your players playing, you know, see if I change this to 16 games, the whole model changes, right? The whole model changes. So it's, and what I'm, the next phase I'm going to talk about is, I think there's an argument in future years that some of those players could be on a fixed contract. And that's why I put these over the side. So if we budget, as an example, I'm going to put 15. This is like the AFL, where at AFL, our top 10 players got a guaranteed amount whether they played or not. If you're trying to try some same, if your salary cap's going to be tight next year, you potentially could go down the path. So if we went up to our players, said, look, if you play 15 games, you're going to get $8.5 grand. But would you be willing to take $7 grand? We'll guarantee you that for the whole season. You have to be around the club every month. We pay you monthly. And it probably averages out about 13.5 to 14 games. Whereas someone, if they do their knee round one, they're underwritten that amount. That's exactly what the AFL do. I think it's too much to bite off this year with the really significant change in the salary cap, right? Because there's such a drop in salary cap. So I just want to, that's what our David's on here tonight, but we've discussed that. We're signing up all our players pretty much for next year. But if we find our caps tight in February and March, if we want to squeeze another couple of players out, we might go to our top 10 players saying, if we underwrite you a certain fixed amount, that might allow us to squeeze in a couple of other players. Does that make sense? So it's a lot to digest. I get that. But John, I just got to get back in to make sure I get into the right screen again here. So that is a tool. I'll send that out tomorrow. Every club should have that. A lot of my clubs do get in trouble with their player payments. But that model I just showed you is exactly what I used at AFL level. Really basic, fundamental model, right? We're going to go into the recalibration of player payments. It's probably the only shining light in what's happened with COVID is that there's finally been the amount of salary that's being paid to players is finally coming into line. The metro leagues have led the way in terms of their drop in the salary cap. So that's particularly Victoria we're talking about here. My personal view might not satisfy the AFL's point of view is that some leagues have missed an opportunity here, where a great opportunity of changing your salary cap accordingly. And my concern is the drop in the salary cap and the earnings you still have to raise next year, there might be a gap. And I'm going to explore that further during this session. So, and I think the AFL have been a bit hamstrung. They're trying to balance particularly regional areas where it's going to be difficult to get players. They've tried to leave enough cap for them to drag players out to the regions. But there's a real balance about club viability versus that. And my concern is that some of those clubs are going to be under real financial pressure at the end of next year. I truly believe that. This is really valuable for and excuse me, I reckon these numbers are about 95% correct. You'll see I've ranked the leagues from highest to lowest. Some of these leagues down here have cut their player payments under 20%. We're talking about pretty good footy. Eastern, Essendon, Northern, and Geelong all paying 100 grand in their salary cap. They've cut their salary cap in half. My rule of thumb with player payments, whatever you pay your players, multiply it by 3. That's what you need to turn over just to pay the bills. To pay the bills. So those metropolitan leagues have really taken the bull by the horns. I have some real concerns about what's happened here. I understand the issue about retention, getting players to travel to the country. This obviously doesn't apply to junior clubs and amateur clubs, but it's a worry from my point of view what's happened here in terms of some of the leagues. I want to go through this. This is a really important slide. It's a lot of data, but I want to walk you through it. This is an example. Let's say we're a league last year that we're paying 110 grand in player payments. I'll be upfront. Coralline paid the salary cap last year, which is 110. So we had to raise 330 grand, right? our salary cap has been dropped to 90, which I think we're the only club in our competition that voted for it to be lower than 90. We wanted 80, and we even wanted 75, but ended up being 90. But even if it's 80, our clubs are going to have to raise $250,000. I'm really concerned in the market next year whether that level of revenue, the clubs will be able to generate $250,000. My concern is I've done some modelling. I estimate a lot of my club's revenue will drop between 30 to 60% next year. And that's a red flag. So I'm going to talk about here. So let's say the revenue, I'm going to pluck a number. Let's say this club's turned over 330 last year. The revenue drops 40%. It's going to drop 132 grand. Their new revenue model is 198. There's going to be a 42 grand shortfall. Massive gap. I actually have got a model that's on our website. John, are you there?
Yeah, mate. Yeah.
So that model, we did I did a tool. Anyone who did our early webinars, we did a tool on estimating where your revenue is going to be. So this is a sample club that turned over 250 grand last year. So it takes you about 10 minutes to complete. I'd encourage everyone to do this. And it's, whereabouts can they find that, Jono? Is it on our website?
Yeah, on our website. I'll put the link in the chat. Yeah.
So I've predicted, look, 50% of our normal sponsorship, let's say it drops to 40%. People's disposable income could drop to 85, by 15%. Fundraising, you might be lucky to get half fundraising next year, and I'll leave 50% in there. I reckon some of your memberships and people attending your games could drop off a little bit, or even your registrations could drop off. Let's say registrations drop off by 20% next year, because some of your players have had a year off. They might think, shit, this is pretty good. I'm happy to keep having this year off. Just putting in those basic fundamentals shows this club's revenue is going to drop 58%. Red flag. And I'd encourage everyone to go through, be the best 20 to 30 minutes you can spend in terms of estimate. And we do the same with costs as well. So you'll get the both. It's a revenue and expense. I developed that tool for the AFL that was sent out to 3,500 clubs across Australia in March. I don't know how many got to the clubs, but it was sent out regardless. But for me, that's the worry. If you go back here, or just go back here to refresh. Some of these clubs, if their revenue is going to drop 30 to 60% and the caps are only dropping this much, you don't have to be Einstein to work out what's going to happen. Yeah? So that's my concern. Clubs need to be forewarned and forearmed. And I know a lot of our clubs, are raising revenue now because some of my clubs are having a holiday in Victoria, but they need to be forewarned and forearmed to be ready for what's coming. A lot of my clubs know things are going to change, but they've got no idea what the depth of what's coming their way, as an example. This came out, Jono, you might want to post this. I'd encourage everyone to read this. The Australian Sports Foundation are a federal government body based out of Canberra. They did a survey of 100 sports and 5,000 clubs, and they are saying 1 in 4 clubs could go to the wall at the end of next year. So I'd encourage everyone to maybe have a look at that. Jono's just posted that in now. Have you, Jono? Yeah,
links in the really, really in-depth report into sort of all aspects.
It's pretty powerful about volunteers dropping off, the ability to raise money. Sponsorship's going to be really difficult. We're going to be living, and going back into this slide here, you notice here, living with COVID. We're still going to be living with COVID next year. You may not be able to get your group functions together. You may not be able to have 200 people in your social rooms after a home game. So this is where I reckon revenue. I reckon your crowds and your gate may or may not be affected. Your social rooms, training nights, Thursday, Tuesday may be affected. Sponsorship, I've got no doubt, will be affected. Once JobKeeper and JobSeeker stops, disposable income could be impacted. And fundraising via gatherings may be impacted. So I'd encourage everyone to go through. The salary cap, you don't have to spend it. But there is a pressure to spend it, isn't there? There is a pressure to spend it because, it's just so. I just encourage everyone to spend the time. If you're looking after your footy budget, have a look at that. Now, AFL, and I reckon they've done a really good job in this space. AFL has 2 equalisation measures, and even at the AFL at the highest level. So their highest level, they have the salary cap and the draft. At community level, it's the salary cap and the player points. So our draft is the player points. And it really has made a difference, right? It's really been really positive for stopping the clubs coming in and bringing in 10 players and getting that premiership, and all of a sudden they take off and the club spends the next 5 years picking up the pieces. The player points, I think, is, it's been really important. There's been a couple of changes, and I think this is a terrific model. I don't know if this has changed, but if you're a regular reserves player, that used to be 3 points. I think they've dropped that to 2. But I think the player points is it's a great equalisation. Some of my leagues handicap the player points, which I like. My league is, and because we don't have divisional footy our way, divisional footy, it sort of equalises itself out. But for example, Caroline, we played in the grand final last year. Our player points are 39 and the bottom team is 47. So it's 8 points of difference. But that's equivalent to 2 A-grade players, and often the gap between the first and the bottom couple are more than 2 players, aren't they? So it really is, and I'm a big supporter of the player points and the salary cap. Typically, a lot of my clubs haven't been able to afford the salary cap, and 8 out of 10 haven't been able to afford it. But as it comes down, they may be able to. So I've got Chris Connolly as my business partner. So Chris is going to talk about the importance of coaching. I always say, you're one president and one senior coach away from a good club becoming a not so good club. You put the wrong people in those positions, things can turn to shite really quickly. And sport's all about momentum. And once it starts going in a negative way, it's like a runaway train. Once it's going this way, it's a little bit easier, going uphill. But the type of coach. So you there, Connells?
Can you hear me?
Yes, mate. Over to you. So Chris Connolly. Yeah. Former Fremantle coach, Melbourne. Anyway, Chris runs the same as what I do in administration, but does it in coaching. So if you're looking for coaches and need support, that's what Chris does. So over to you, Chris.
Yeah, look, next week we'll look at how to appoint and develop a coach. But this particular aspect of coaching, it's really important that you look at the style of coach. There's fundamentals to coaching, but what style of coach does your club need? So all the points that are listed on the slide there, a coach has a little bit of all of those things in him, but where are you going to weight the importance that your, not just coach, but your coaching staff need? And just listening to Terry, I think it's going to be important that your coach understands that he's going to have to play a part in driving the business of the club, because if he wants to pay the full salary cap, if he wants to have the best footballs and a great environment to train in, then the club's going to have to be making money, and he's going to have to understand that he'll need to be involved in that in terms of driving sponsorship, membership, making sure people do attend functions if you're able to have them. I think the coaching style, firstly to break it down, your senior coach of your netball or football team have the biggest influence, and they will be the role model within the club. So wherever they weight their skills in terms of their style, some things may not come natural that you need. So that's where the director of coaching and the assistant coaches become very important. And you know that, sometimes your strength is your weakness as a coach. So you need a team around the senior coach to make sure the balance is there and you're creating the right environment for your players. When you go down through the group, whether it's the reserves coach or the underage coaches, you really start to weight the style into more the development, but there might be some welfare issues, some galvanizing, leadership, discipline, whatever the case may be. At the very least, when you review your coach, develop your coach, or when you're appointing a coach, it does create a meaningful discussion in what you're trying to achieve. So the first thing you do, and I'll go through it again in more depth next week, is do a club audit on what you need as a coach. Now, you may have some coaches in play now, but really the future of your coaching, you start planning out. I mean, Coraline will need another coach at some stage. So when do you start sowing the seed? When do you start looking around for the type of coach that can fulfill that role for your club? The other thing I think that's important with the challenges ahead is to be innovative. One of the things I've been impressed with is the dual coaching. You know, a lot of coaches are taking up that option. That makes some sense to me. You know, I'm big on, I'll talk about, I could go on and on, so I'm going to round this up, but you've got to maximize every minute of training. I always feel when there's two good coaches, one can do the individual skill development early in the training session. The senior coach can look at the numbers at the session and then make sure he has a great team training program in the second half of the session, so you're maximizing the training program. I'll just finish by saying this. If you want to attract the best coaches to be interviewed to coach your club, you've got to show that you're on track to be the best club in the region. And that means having thorough plans, strategic plans. It means showing the plan for the next 12 months to show, you know, Terry spoke about that they understand the player salary cap, how you're going to achieve the money to pay that cap, the part he plays, I spoke about before. But that planning is going to encourage him to become the coach of your club, not just team, your club, play a big senior kind of leadership role, but not just for 1 year. If you get a good coach like, and I know David, that Coraline has, you know, you want that guy to be coaching your club for as long as possible, between 5 and 10 years, at least 5 years, because, you know, when the environment's right, you want to get all the other pieces together to make sure that, you know, you can achieve the club success that you set yourself. So that's a bit of an insight. Audit the club. What style of coach do you need your senior coach to be? What style of coach do you need for your junior teams? You know, we've got women teams, we've got men's teams, we've got some teams that are a little bit need a little bit more discipline than others. Some needed to be galvanised because they're all singing from different hymn books. But that's some things to consider. Next week, I'll go through how to appoint your coach. I'll tell you what, if you appoint the right coach, you're going to solve a hell of a lot of problems for your club, because we've all seen how much damage a coach who's not up to the level can cause within your club.
Perfect, Chris. Right. So Chris has got, anyone wants to hang around, we'll probably end up going another till 7 o'clock, but Chris can hang around. We'll ask some questions if anyone wants to hang around and listen to Christopher. But anyone who's our current client on our website, so you would have seen here, anyone who logs into our, is already a current TDS club, you'll notice here, there's a little survey that our clubs do to determine what sort of coach they need, because they often don't know what sort of coach they need. So if you're a current club, I can see a number of clubs there now, just a simple 10 to 15 minute survey on determining what club type of coach you need during your next phase of your coaching. Because I said earlier, you're one senior coach away and one president away from a good club becoming not so good club. And if you put the wrong people in those positions, you end up picking up the pieces. So that's part of, you know, an extra asset that we provide to our clubs. Now, I reckon anyone who's dialed into this would have heard of the silly season. Is this the worst bloody time of the year? Seriously? I've signed up the coach with David this week, and it's like herding cats, right? It's been even more difficult this year because the players have had a year off. Try to negotiate to get them to understand what the new landscape is even difficult. So, as I say here, holding a list together between seasons is a big enough challenge. It's going to be tougher for Victorian clubs who didn't have any footy. I just spoke to a gentleman in South Australia who about half the season, and Tassie the same, and Queensland the same. Get them to understand it. I think it's really important to firm up your senior coach early. Some of my clubs have done it late. Players often won't sign up until they know who the head coach is. And most club playing lists are fragile. You lose 3 to 4 key players at a certain time, it can result in an exodus, right? And it's, as I said, sport's all about momentum. Next Friday's webinar is all about retaining your list, appointment of a coaching, and list management. Tonight is more about administration, getting your cap right, getting your structures right, understanding your budgets, yeah? And we're going to talk about the importance of contract negotiation. If you haven't started your contract negotiations for next year, you should have. And I've always set up the top line here, premierships, and it's not just about premierships. Successes, I'm going to say it anyway. Premierships are won in September, but it's the September before. And I know David and we would have spoken 30 times last week. And I reckon we've spoken once or twice this week because we signed up nearly all our players for next year. And now we can have a bit of a break. Now we're topping up with a couple of blokes we've lost. We've lost one guy, another guy hasn't signed yet, but we need to top that up. But the silly season is what drives, and I said to David, I think I'm nearly over silly season. It's just, I reckon I'm getting too old for it. But I just realise how important it is to get right. You know, everyone's heard of the expression, you get the off-field right, on-field will come. I reckon it's the other way around. You got to get your on-field healthy. If you've got it's like any business, you've got a poor product, your business model breaks down. And player payments are not two dirty words put together. We're going to talk about contract negotiations. I know with our salary cap, that one-page form that I just showed you earlier with all the leagues and where it was changing, and we showed that to our players. I said, look, this is what's going to happen. So you need to explain in detail, and I'll bring them all up. So the players and it's not just the players, it's the coaches. Appoint the coach first, if you can. It provides a certainty for players because often a lot of players won't sign up until the coach is signed up because they want to know who they're playing under, right? This is my strategy at Coralline, and it's worked pretty well since 2006. We didn't have much to start with in 2006. They say 2007. Pick out your top 5 players and most influential players. Try to lock them in first. I find once we do that at Coralline, the rest sort of can fall into place because they are follow the leader a little bit. And we pick out our most influential players and sign them up. Sign your players where possible in August, September. Minimise the silly season. Because it's amazing. I've seen clubs thought they had it together. All of a sudden they lose 3 or 4 players and then they've lost 8 to 10. Try and settle down the silly season. Use social media to announce signings. Anyone who goes on the Coralline Football Club page, we've already signed 26 players. And we've got players ringing us, I haven't posted it up yet. You haven't posted us up yet. You know, so the players see that positivity of seeing, you know, everyone's got egos. Players are no different. The contract negotiator needs to know the value of the market. Minimise your overs and maximise your unders. I dealt with too many clubs where a person doing the negotiating doesn't understand the true market value of the player. And they get thrown in and they just get desperate and they sign players overs. Some clubs, I get that, particularly early on, to settle things down and get things moving. But it's a really critical aspect of any club. Try and do, you don't want to, and whoever's doing your contracts to be walked over. There's some players can take, depends on who's doing negotiating. And I think it's all about, I do it a little bit differently. I never ask a player what they want. I always offer them what we're going to give them. That makes a sense. So I never go, what do you want from us? I said, look, this based on where we think you're in the market, based on the relativity of our playing list, this is where we think you fit. Does that suit or not? And that's, so some of my clubs usually go the other way. They're asking the player what they want. I go the other way around. So this is what we're prepared to pay you. And again, trying to squeeze the amount of everyone under the same salary cap. And medicos and trainers, I think pay them fixed fees. A lot of my clubs do weeklies and they end up being caught out. You end up in finals. A lot of clubs can't generate too much money in finals and you get caught out there. Now, cosmetic versus real success, there's a lot of clubs have that boom and bust theory. Fortunately, it's slowed down with the player points and the salary cap. I have some footy clubs where the footy department is driving the club. They're running the club. They're making all the key decisions. And some of the footballers are running the club. And I know I could rattle off that at the end of the day, the club, you can't have the tail wagging the dog. And I know I could rattle off one club perfect where the coach wasn't receptive to the committee. that flowed onto the players. The players were dictating terms, and I said, well, unless you change that now, you'll be beholden to the players from here on. As soon as they took the coach out, they took control. They started assessing the terms of how they're going to pay their players. The whole thing changed. The committee's role is not about the quick fix. A lot of my clubs have really drawn into the quick fix. I think the equalisation measures have really helped in the last 3 years with salary caps and player payments. And many of my clubs are fragile. They are fragile. Their committees are fragile. Their finances are fragile. They don't have enough people, the volunteers, and often their revenue model's fragile.
Do you want to do the rest of those polls now?
Yes, do that now, Jono. Over to you, mate. Good. I should have done that earlier. So Jono's going to do a couple of polls so we get a good handle on.
Yeah, just a bit of background of some opinions of sort of what's going on in the room. So the first one we're going to touch on is just whether or not when TD touched on before, do you have a football budget to work to? And what are your thoughts on the salary cap change for 2021?
If it doesn't apply, then just put it unsure. But are you happy with the salary cap changes in your competition?
And just while we're sort of waiting for those results to come through, Kevin's just chucked a question in. How do you approach the problem in SA at the moment where we aren't finding out what point system and salary cap are for 2021 until September 30?
Yeah, it's a good question, Kevin. What I've done with a lot of it, I'll give you an example. We signed up 20 odd of our players at Coralline before the salary cap was announced. We went to every player and said, except one rejected it, and that person left the club. We said, we'll sign you up on whatever you were on last year, if we felt that was a fair value, multiplied that by whatever the salary cap ends up being. So our salary cap only dropped 20%. So everyone got whatever they were on times 80%. So we didn't want to wait till the league sorted out their salary cap. So we got on the front foot. The player points, look, they haven't really changed the player points too much, but I reckon they should. I reckon there's going to be more movement than ever next year because players have had a year off and maybe they're going to, if there's not as much money regionally, they might play closer to inner city. I don't know. I just think the player points probably needs to be higher. So do you have a detailed footy budget? 70%?
Yeah, 70% do. I'd suggest the other 30% probably might be something to look at, definitely.
Yeah. And your thoughts on the change of the salary cap. So there's 1 in 3 are happy. There's 25% are saying it should have been more. There's one person said it was too much and the rest weren't sure. But again, I think this is a great opportunity of where clubs jump out of there, Jono. And in
just go to the next one, sorry, too.
You're going to go straight to the next one?
Yeah, may as well.
So we'll knock this on the head and then we'll kick into the gear.
Yeah. So just next one quickly. Just around the salary caps and what clubs are paying. So what percentage of the salary cap did your club pay? That should say 2019. And then what percentage of the salary cap do you intend to pay in 2021? Just going off potentially what we were touching on earlier around, the revenue versus the cap drop and all that sort of stuff. So
there's some really interesting data here, which I like, which is because the lowering of the salary cap will allow more clubs to potentially pay the cap if they can afford to do it, right? So
it's going to be easy to go up and down as well with the sort of
it's interesting. Remember I said earlier only 80% of my clubs could afford to pay the cap. So let's just kick that into gear, Jono. So it's interesting. There you go. Remember I said only 80% of the clubs could afford to pay the cap? 22% said they paid the cap last year. That's 78%, which is basically what I said. 8 out of 10 clubs couldn't afford the cap. Under the new system, they're saying 53% are going to spend the salary cap. Isn't that a massive shift? 2 out of 10 to now, which is in terms of equalisation, that's a good outcome. So now half the clubs are saying they're going to spend the cap, but they've got to raise enough money to pay the bills, right? So that is really powerful data, I reckon. And as I said, and because often when I look at and I've done reviews of major leagues around the state, and often the salary cap ladder often reflects the the home and away ladder. So whoever's spending the most down to who's spending the least, providing you spend it right. So, okay.
Just put the last one up quickly. Just how confident are you? Just a gut feel. How confident are you?
I'll just explain this before you answer this.
Yep.
So whatever the salary cap is, right, multiply that by 3. Do you think, let's say it's 80 grand, do you think your club can raise $250,000 next year in a compromised COVID landscape? So have a crack at that. Wow, this is concerning and riveting data, what I'm saying here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically saying more clubs are going to spend money next year. All right, let's just jump into that, Jono. Wow. 60% are saying it's going to be touch and go. We've got 17%, 2 out of 10 are saying, oh yeah, we're really confident we can raise enough money to pay the bills. But I'm looking at take out the 17%, there is 80% of the clubs are worried about how they're going to raise enough money. So let's say the cap, I'll be open with you, my club's salary cap next year, 90. I can't see hardly any clubs raising over $250,000 in our next year. And that's a red flag for me. Massive red flag. So, mate, that is a concerning stat but that's what these sessions are so important in terms of understanding that. So have we got anything else, Jono? Is that pretty much it?
That's all. Keep going.
We're going pretty well, I think. So I always talk about the 3 pieces to running a club. You got to get your core product healthy. Like Coraline in 2005 was on its knees. Like any new business, you need new product coming through. And your facilities. A lot of my clubs, I rarely see anyone get 3 right at the one time. And this is how Coraline's done it. We were stuffed in all assets. In 2006, we got this healthy. We didn't have a junior club. We started a junior club in 2010 and we bought buses and just to encourage our players, we don't charge any junior players at Coraline's to play. We pay for everything. Fees, rego, jumpers, shorts, socks. Because it costs us $2 to $3 grand a team. But I always say, for every team you don't have, you lose about 10 to 15 grand of revenue. So it's a good investment as far as I'm concerned, right? Infrastructure. You know, if you don't keep up to speed with your facilities, you're going to be left behind, and it's a build it and they come philosophy. And I think very rarely, often when I see a club put all their energies into infrastructure, sometimes their senior stuff drops off because it's such a big gig, isn't it? You know, pulling it all together. This is the challenge of getting healthy on field. So we're going to talk about how do you break the cycle. And this is why it's harder for the lower tier clubs. Players become cheaper based on on-field results. And they're attracted to the environment, winning, facilities, culture. We're going to talk about how to break it next year. But this is the biggest issue. Next year, we've all got the same salary cap. The teams with a junior base have got an advantage over the others with the low communities. This is my concern. And that's why we're sort of set up a little bit at Coraline to succeed in that a market, let's say a $200 player, that's worth $200. Coraline will pay that player $150. The top 2 or 3 teams, because players, I always say we're selling dreams, and when you get to my old age, we sell lifelong memories and that sort of stuff, and we've had a lot of success. But the teams in the 4th to 7th, they'll probably pay the market rate. The teams that are in the bottom 2 or 3 teams, they're paying $300. So we've got the same salary cap, but we're paying $150. But some of our clubs who are really struggling to get off the mat are paying $300 to the same player, and we've got the same salary cap. That's where the player points comes into play, which is really important. But I'm a strong supporter of the caps and the points. But for me, there's still something missing, which I'll go into another time, maybe next week. But that's just, you know, players will play for less if they think they're going to play in finals and play in grand finals. And fortunately, but the players the clubs that are on their, you know, their bones of their backside, they end up paying overs. And that's part of the challenge. So that's sort of the framework of what we're doing. I'm going to summarise it. But so for those who don't, we've got a lot of first timers tonight. We offer this. We do a lot of admin. This is my first footy webinar, but the footy stuff is my bread and butter in terms of Coraline, which I've been doing at grassroots. we provide this. We give anyone who wants to do a free health check on our website. We run weekly webinars. I'm going to touch on that, on everything. We offer a 12-month support package for clubs. It's 2.5, including GST. We give you an audit. We give you a strategic plan. We give you a revenue plan. We've got a lot of clubs on here tonight. This is what we give our clubs. A lot of our clubs, when I say 30 to 75 grand year one, I don't say that lightly. A lot of our clubs are raising a lot more than that because the revenue model clubs are using is 50 years old. This is how clubs raise money off the top of my head. If there's, and mostly canteen, bar, 0 to 20 sponsors, 3 to 6 fundraisers. They'll sell 2 to 3 branding assets like a polo or a shorts or a jumper. They'll sell 0 to 25 memberships, and they might have a gate, and that's it. That's how 95% of clubs raise money. It is totally out of date. So these sessions, so we give our clubs 3 or 4 initiatives to raise that, if not more. We give you an operational plan. We give a strategic plan. We give you, and we provide, we focus on structure, financials, and volunteers. So I want to say to you, this is where the clubs can miss out. There's a federal government initiative for people that are 55 and over, pre-pension, to be funded to work for your club, but 95% of my clubs don't, 99% of my clubs don't know that exists. So we go through the details of that. So basically, these are the plans we give. And like we've done, you name it, we've done we do all sports. This is just AFL tonight, but the last week we've done go-karts, water polo. What else do you know?
Cricket, soccer, baseball.
We had baseball club in Queensland the other night, but they all sports have the same challenges, right? So this is what we give to our clubs. I want to go through this and tell me if you think this is why clubs are struggling. Tell me if volunteers who are juggling family, club and work can pull all this together. You know, you need to do an audit before you really know what's going on. You've got to sort out your structure. You need a new revenue model. Club's got to have a budget. You've got to, once you work out what your structure, you need to have a planning day. What are you going to do in the first 12 months? Do you have a strategic plan? Do you have a succession plan? Do you have a master plan? Do you have a footy budget? Do you have your list management? And we're expecting volunteers to pull this together for free. It's a bloody lot of work there. And that's why a lot of clubs are struggling, because a lot of clubs are struggling with we do the stuff in the red, and the clubs, we help the clubs with the yellow as well. But again, you know, it's 2.5 including GST. As part of that, you get to ring us anytime during the 12 months, which is what we do. Anyone who wants, Jono, you might want to put this up, but just put up the chat now if we can. But I just want to give you an example. Jono, can you put up the chat, mate?
Yep.
So any clubs, a lot of my clubs get stuck and they know something's not quite right. They don't, it's hard to fix something if you might be already a TDS club, but a lot of my clubs that know that something's not quite right, but it's hard to fix something if you don't know what's broken. There's a real expertise in doing this stuff. And fortunately, a guy like Chris and myself, this has been our career, but it really, a lot of my clubs just keep going up and down on the spot, and they use this old-fashioned revenue model. They have 3 or 4 people doing all the work, and what we're finding is we're losing good quality people because they're getting blown up because this is supposed to be fun. You know, I presented to 34 presidents last year. 21 were new in the room. 21. Shit, it's supposed to be fun, this job. But it's very good at jump. Thanks, John. That's enough. But at the end of the day, it gives you, just shows you how difficult it can be, right? We're getting to the pointy end. So we've done that. We offer half, some of our clubs, we offer half and half up front, and we back ourselves to raise you 20 times more. This is, I'm just going to play you a little video, 1-minute video, and then we're going to answer a few questions. I'm going to show you, this is just a club from Furniture Gully. It goes for 1 minute, but just have a quick listen to what, thumbs up if you can hear this. Wait a minute. Thumbs up.
You paused it.
Oh, so that's why I've got you there, Jono. Why can't I see that? Wait a minute. Thumbs up. Right now. Thumbs up. Yeah.
So we're probably at a stage of the club where we've got people that are inexperienced but taking on the roles and want to drive the club. something further. So when you get someone that knows what they're doing, comes in, it opens your eyes up big time. And just having 2-3 hours, it really gives you a clear pathway really on what you've got to do. If we can achieve what we said tonight, President's role should be pretty, not going to say easy, but everything should run pretty tight. And it'll be more maintaining the club day to day and working with the board to oversee the whole club for future planning. So I would recommend it 100% to any clubs out there, definitely.
All good, Jono?
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah. So this bloke's a ripper. He's a 20. Is he, how old is he, Jono? 24?
22, I think he was.
22. President of his local. What div are they in, Johnny? Jono?
One below us, I think. So that'd be Division 3.
So Jono's in Eastern Suburbs Footy Club. He's involved with Heathmont Jets.
Yep.
But this guy was a ripper, and he's all over it, and he's got a lot of energy. For those that don't know, particularly administration, we've got a lot of newcomers tonight. We're starting these Monday week, every Monday night at 7 o'clock for the whole year. We've got 13 topics on committee structures, on grants, on finances, on sponsorship, on membership, on culture, on fundraising, on having a strategic plan, having technology, all that sort of stuff. So every you'll get an email from me if you want a reminder. But these webinars, we've had 3,500 people sit on our webinars, and since we started these, so some of it'll be like regular Monday viewing, I think, hopefully for some that you might tune in, particularly administrators. But again, what we've found since doing this, there's not one sport in Australia educating administrators on how to run a club. They're basically left to fend for yourself. And that's the challenge. So the recap of the session is you've got cosmetic. There's a lot of clubs who have that boom and bust. You know, that salary cap estimator, make sure you get over your player payments. The recalibration of player payments is a shining light in the current situation, but I don't think they've gone hard enough. The revenue projection is a red flag. Well, that stat that came out that said 17% or 7%, 17 or 7% said they were confident they're going to raise enough money to pay the bills next year. That's a red flag if I've ever seen one. Football department structure, having a budget, ability to contract, negotiate, dealing with a silly season type of coach. So next week, this is what we're going to go through, which is Chris is going to talk about the appointment of senior coaching, head coaches, how important that is. This is a lot of my clubs. They don't get their insurances right. I think there's such a great opportunity. It's minimal, and I think it's well time worth invested in that. List management is critical. We can talk about how the players and the coaches can help the club do what they need to do. We're going to bring in some new potential revenue initiatives next week that you can look at to help fund your department. If you think there's going to be a gap in your players, in your revenue generation next year, and if you're in charge of your footy department, and if you want some like your players may not get paid, if you want your players, I'd be encourage you to your revenue model, use this downtime to plan. This is unique time. Often clubs don't have this amount of time to put things in place. And then we're going to talk about how to review and develop coaches. So that's pretty much it. I'm happy to take anyone's got any questions. We're right on an hour. We start about 7:03. Are you there, Christopher? John, have you got any questions?
Nothing's come through as yet.
But if anyone's got any questions, like people ask me about just joining fees, I don't like them at all. People ask me about, I'm not going to be quoted on taxing players, whether I should tax or not tax players. I'm not going to go there. But if anything, it's becoming more of a hobby than ever because you potentially those paid players can offset their income against their travel and their out of pockets. It's a second job and all that sort of stuff.
Craig just asked, is the salary cap estimator on the website? We're going to email that out.
No, it's not. It's not. So we'll send that out tomorrow. Anyone who's attended tonight's session, we'll send that out tomorrow. As I said, that model, everyone should put it in place because a lot of my clubs do get in trouble. Because AFL is probably 1/3 of our business. So we that's why tonight I think we've got a couple of cricket clubs who've tuned in tonight, believe it or not, because it's probably the same fundamentals, but we made this specifically for AFL. But we'll post that out. We'll email that out tomorrow. So anything else, Jono? I mean, we're pretty much there.
No other questions.
Hey, Connell's, you there?
Yep.
Yeah, so you want to summarise the session, mate, as an outsider look? Because Chris, this is the first time we've run this footy department. If you felt it was of value, just say thank you, or if it wasn't, then tell us also. All good feedback, good and bad. Chris, how do you summarise? Just you can summarise the session, mate.
Sorry, Chris, before you go, mate, Brett just chimed in with how much, probably aim this at both of you guys, how much success do you think the leagues will have in policing the salary cap changes?
Oh, it's going to be really interesting because a lot of the leagues are cutting back on their staff. So I think, look, cut to the chase. If people want to take advantage of it, they're going to. You would have seen earlier that 8 out of 10 of clubs couldn't afford to spend the money in the cap anyway. So you only had 1 or 2 that were breaking the rules. Sorry, or spending the cap or maybe potentially crossing the line. I just think there needs to be tighter regulations. I think presidents and treasurers and coaches need to sign stat decks, which is an extra level just to make sure everyone does the right thing. But some people may not agree with that, but that's what I reckon. But I don't think they'll ever go that way because we're all volunteers in the end of the day. Christopher?
Oh, look, kind of my take, I've been in a lot of Terry sessions and played a big part saying, Terry, your workshops, you're not telling the whole story. We need to have a kind of greater webinar series. I'd just like to say, get as many people around your club. Like, obviously, you people are leaders and you want to improve. And that's a great value to have in your club because the players have got to improve, the coaches should be improving, so should the people on the committee. Get as many people watching Terry stuff as you can so they understand how difficult it is to run a club. Now, one of the reasons that us three are involved in this business is we grew up in footy clubs and we're forever grateful to the people who created the environment in which we could become the people we've become. It's such a great responsibility. It's a tough job. Get as many people understanding how tough it is and understanding how we can take care of things and create a great environment for your clubs. And I thought it was fantastic, TD. And I must say, every time I kind of get involved in one of Terry's and Jono's webinars, I always pick up something. But probably the most important thing, it just creates an energy. Yep, we can get on and get this done. And it's going to be a big challenge. Probably the next year and a half. Certainly, well, this season's probably gone, but next season is going to be a really tough challenge. But it's going to be a challenge for your opposition. At the end of the day, we're competing against other clubs, other teams. So hopefully this will put you ahead of the game.
All right, over and out from me, guys. Thanks, everybody and ladies. We've got a few ladies here tonight. So thanks, everybody, again for tuning in. And hopefully you found this of value. And you hopefully see you in the next sessions. We've got another session next Friday night, which hope we might see you then. So